What does the battle for the U.S. Senate look like this November? Let's break down the biggest races and why the Democrats have such an uphill climb. Hi, I'm Tokyo, and this channel is all about getting voters on the left quick, informative content that keeps you in the know and empowers you to take action. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the election, let's talk about three really great reasons why Democrats want to hang on to the U.S. Senate. The first, of course, is the Supreme Court. Remember that the U.S. Senate is where any nominations for Supreme Court justices, or any federal judge for that matter, gets confirmed. So we want to be in control of whether or not we want nominations to move forward or not. And keep in mind that most presidents get to nominate up to 3 Supreme Court justices. And Biden so far has only gotten 1. So whoever the next president is, the law of averages says they're going to probably be replacing at least 2 of them. The second reason why we want to hang on to the Senate is because we want to be able to control what happens on January 6th. Remember that on January 6th, the Congress, the new Congress, will be the ones that certify each state's electoral votes. And without going into the specifics of the ins and outs of what happens that day, the fact of the matter is, if the Democrats retain control of the U.S. Senate on January 6th, there will be no way for Republicans to decertify or not certify a state's electoral votes. The third reason is simply so that Democrats are in control of which pieces of legislation we end up voting on or not voting on. So no matter who the president is or who controls the House, the Senate can be the stopgap for terrible bills or the place where bills become laws. All right, let's talk about these Senate races. Now, we all know that the Senate has exactly 100 senators, 2 senators for every single state. And right now, the Democrats hold the barest of majorities with 51 votes. That would be both the Democrats and the independents that caucus with Democrats. So they act like Democrats when it comes to voting. And in those cases, if there's ever a tie, say someone is missing from the Senate, we currently have the vice president who can break those ties in the Democrats' favor. Now, senators have the longest terms of service. We all know that the president serves for 4 years. House representatives only serve for 2 years before they have to get reelected. But senators are elected for 6-year terms. So in any given election year, only about 1/3 of the senators are up for re-election. Like this year, we have 33 senators who are up for election. In 2026, there'll be another different 33 people. And then 2 years after that, in 2028, the remaining 34 senators will have to be reelected. We want to fight for every single one of these Senate seats because, again, they're going to keep these Senate seats for 6 years. It makes the Democrats far more competitive in future years if we're able to hang on to as many of the seats this year as we can. I mentioned earlier that this year, for the Senate to hang on to control, it's going to be an uphill climb for the Democrats. And let's get into why it's going to be so difficult to hang on to. Well worth fighting for, but it will be difficult. So as I mentioned, there are 33 senators that are up for election this year. Only 10 of them are Republicans. So the Democrats have to hang on to 23 seats, right? Or they're aiming to hang on to at least the 23 seats that we currently have, whereas the Republicans only have to defend 10 seats. And the bad news doesn't stop there. Now, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm largely optimistic and positive, so you can be sure that I've got both helpful and hopeful information before this video is done. So the bad news is that the Democrats have to fight for far more competitive Senate seats than the Republicans do. And so to demonstrate this, I want to give you a quick briefing on what a race rating is. Race ratings are not at all like polls. What race ratings do is that they basically rate an election, so any election, for how competitive it is. So it's not, so they do look at polls, but it's not poll based. They look at previous elections down to like the district level, looking at where the voters are, where they're registered. A lot of different pieces go into determining how competitive a race is. So to demonstrate the categories, let's look at the race rating categories that Cook Political Report uses. All right, with this chart, let's start in the middle. The middle is the toss-up category. These are the most competitive seats where neither party has an advantage. So literally, whoever works hardest is going to win these seats. Now, one out from toss-up, the next category is the lean category. This category means that it's still incredibly competitive. Either party can win it, but there is a slight advantage for the party that it's leaning towards. So you can see that there's a lean Democrat and a lean Republican. So these are also very, very competitive, definitely worth fighting for. The next category out, it's becoming quite a lot less competitive. It still can flip every year, right? There's always times when somebody in a likely column flips, but it's much harder to flip them because that party has so much more of an advantage. And then in the farthest column on either side, we see the safe category. Again, we all know that anything can happen, but time after time after time, these districts, or in this case for senators, states, have proven to be incredibly safe for the party. All right, let's map out how competitive the Republican Senate seats are this year. As you can see, they don't have any in the toss-up column. They don't even have any Senate seats up for re-election in the lean column. And we only have 2 in the likely column. You'll see that that's Florida and Texas. The rest of these seats are deemed safe for Republicans. That means we have 2 states, only 2 states, where we have any chance of flipping them when it comes to the Republican. This means it's going to be far more critical for us to be focused on the seats we currently have and making sure we win those. And now let's look at how those map out to these categories. Right away, you can see why this becomes such a difficult election for the Democrats. Even before we look at the toss-up column, look over there in safe red. That's West Virginia. Again, without Joe Manchin in that seat, we don't have any hope of hanging on to that Senate seat. So in our 51 majority, losing West Virginia means that we're down to an even Steven 50-50. Moving on to the toss-up column, you can see that we have 3 states that are in the toss-up column. We have 4 in the lean column and 1 in the likely column. I should also mention that these categories are not static. They do not move very often, but there are things that happen during the course of a campaign that can shift the competitiveness of these seats. I'm sure right about now you're wondering, where in the world is the hopeful news in all of this? Well, I'm happy to tell you that Republican voters are not very good at picking people to be their candidates. And the Republicans have nominated a whole bunch of candidates to run against our Democratic senators who have a lot of baggage. I'm not going to give you a full rundown of each one of these Senate races, although I certainly could do that in a future YouTube video if you wanted me to. But let me just give you 3 examples. So in Montana, Jon Tester is running against Tim Sheehy. Tim Sheehy claims that he was shot in Afghanistan. Turns out he was not. So we've got a stolen valor problem. He also said that he grew up in a rural area. And again, he did not. In Ohio, Democrat Sherrod Brown is running against Bernie Moreno. Bernie Moreno claimed that his family immigrated with absolutely nothing. But of course, it turns out that he grew up wealthy and very well connected in Colombia. On top of that, Bernie Moreno has been adamant about wanting a national abortion ban and wants no exceptions. And in Pennsylvania, we have Democrat Bob Casey running against David McCormick. David McCormick is from Connecticut, not Pennsylvania, and has no voting record of voting in Pennsylvania for the last 15 years. On top of that, he's trying to convince everyone through his campaign ads that he grew up a farmer, when of course it turns out he had a very privileged childhood and of course is currently a CEO of one of the biggest hedge funds in the country. If you want more specifics about which states and who's running, click the description below. I've listed out each of the main categories that are competitive, the states that are in those particular categories, and the candidates running in those categories. So the big question, how do we win? We win by doing the work. I want to encourage each and every one of you to pick a Senate race that you want to make sure that we either retain or flip and get involved in activities that will help. And I have 3 places that you can go just right from the comfort of your own home, and get involved to help turn out voters for these important Senate seats. The first one is Vote Forward. Vote Forward is having people write letters to voters in some of these critical states that have Senate seats. You can even pick which campaign that you want to work on. Again, the description and the link to get there is down below. The second one is Swing Left. The Swing Left website is wonderful. You just click into wherever it is that you want to help, and they will connect you with all kinds of activities that you can do to help that particular state. The third one is Postcards to Swing States. So like Vote Forward, but they're sending postcards to voters in these critical Senate seat states. Now, if you live in any one of these states that's got a really important Senate race, you can, of course, go directly to the campaign. Just type in the senator's name, say campaign offices, and you'll find out where the nearest campaign office is to you. And you can ask, hey, I want to volunteer, and they will let you know what they need most. Now I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below what questions you have about either the Senate races, the election, or particular Senate seats, and I'll do my best to answer. Then second, I'd love to find out what other topics you might want me to cover between now and the election. You never know, I might just pick your topic to do a YouTube video on. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.